Participants here, I want to welcome you again. My name is Michelle Corfield and I'll be your moderator today. I now invite Chief McLeod to the mic for some opening remarks.
It's good to be here and to see you all. And I know that like most of us in our communities, we're quite busy taking care of our citizens. No different here. And just want to say good afternoon to our chiefs, our council members, our elders, our economic development leaders, and our business leaders that have joined us today. So good to have you. As mentioned, I am the Almijom, or the chief for Upper Nicola here in beautiful territory, Okanagan territory. And I'm coming to you from my home in Ilkalmilch, or Kolshana, Indian Reserve number 1, right next to the beautiful Nicola Lake here in the Nicola Valley. So it's good to be here and welcome. I will start with before we start the discussions and the dialogue, I want to start us off in a good way. Just an acknowledgement to our higher power, Okol and Creator. We just give you thanks today for all that we've been able to achieve in our world, in our homes, in our community, with our families and with our citizens. Okol, we know that we're having many challenges as family, as community, and leadership in reaching out to ensure that we're all okay. Okol will continue to lean on you to give us that path, that road, that wisdom, that strength to continue doing all that we can for our families. Okol, we just ask that you be here in this gathering this afternoon. Allow us to be heard, to be seen, to be understood, so that the path that we're laying down, the new path that we're laying down, the challenges that we face could be addressed, could be seen, and that road forged ahead in a good way for the work that we want to do. I just ask that you continue to provide and give assurance and strength to the people in our community that are suffering, that are struggling. And we know there are many. And continue to provide for our elders and our youth. I know that they are having a very hard time right now with the world as it sits. We just ask that you continue to provide and take care of them. And for all of that, we just give you thanks again for our life, for our opportunity to participate here in this gathering with that white limblin. Thank you.
Thanks, Harvey.
Thank you, White.
I'd like to now call upon Regional Chief Terry Teegee.
I notice Michelle, Masai, Chief McLeod for the prayer, and Ganeza, Tsaikoza, Skaiza, in my mother's tongue, Samoyet, Timanak, Timawaget, Chiefs, Hereditary Chiefs, guests, practitioners, EgDev leaders. First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory I'm on. I'm in the head office at the BCAFN in Clydley, Tene, unceded, unsurrendered, continually occupied territory of the Dakat people. First of all, I just want to thank you all for attending today this Toolkit webinar and accepting this invitation. So really what this meeting is about is to go through what we've developed here at the BCAFN what is known as the Cannabis Toolkit. And the information we gathered to date is what we currently know, and the current progress of the cannabis market, as it were, in not only Canada, but also British Columbia, as we to have different arrangements with different provinces. As the co-chair, I am the co-chair for the Assembly of First Nations on the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis. It certainly has been difficult to meet over the last year, as we all know, during this pandemic, which began really on March 12th of last year. We had, previous to that, we had a very aggressive meeting schedule as this was brought upon myself to start dealing with the issues of cannabis as part of the economic development portfolio. Previous regional chiefs, Jocelyn Picard and previous chief from Ontario, were the leads for this cannabis file, Isidore Day. But moving forward, the national chief put it on my file. So we decided to meet as much as we can when this was changed the portfolio to myself as a regional chief. We met anywhere from 2 to 3 months, and really creating that space for our Indigenous peoples in Canada. So during this time, with the involvement of other leaders and other chiefs across the nation, we've learned of what is going on in different areas. And at the start of taking on this file, it was really a wild, wild west, as we saw the initiation of the cannabis becoming legal in 2017. So right now there is a 3-year review, and this October there will be a review of the legislation federally, and that is one of the tasks that we're really tackling at the Chiefs table, is to look at what we want to see within the legislation and listen to our regions as well, and what needs to change within the cannabis legislation federally. Here in British Columbia, we do have agreements with the province of BC called Section 19 agreements. And this was created with the involvement of our First Nations people. But certainly, I think, there's definitely challenges there as well. I hold my hands up to the working group, along with representatives from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and the First Nations Summit, that are part of the working group with the province of British Columbia. So there's definitely many moving pieces, multifaceted work that we're doing here at BCAFN. We put it together in this toolkit and to make a better understanding of what are the current state of affairs, not only here in British Columbia, but nationally. I want to thank Yvonne Laroque from Miller Titterley for putting this toolkit together and really bringing all the information that we know so far together. And the opportunity to dialogue is today, and thank Michelle for carrying on with this meeting and perhaps offer some time for dialogue in terms of what is going on here in British Columbia. We'll hear from different specific cases of many of the barriers and challenges that have really challenged many of our First Nations communities to be, really in the market of cannabis. But I think, there's also the challenges here is that, although this is an opportunity, it is a huge risk. So what I really want to create is make sure that all nations and all First Nations communities are well informed before they come into the cannabis market. What we're seeing and what we're realizing now is that since 4 years ago, since the legalization of cannabis, is that it has really become a saturated market. It's more or less become similar to, if you recall, the .com boom in the 90s, where everybody had a website and whatnot, and then everything fell flat. Right now, the market is somewhat saturated on a very industrial level, but there's definitely a place for niche markets and whatnot. So the other piece to this from the chief's table is getting not only information out to the communities of the opportunities here, but also the health risks in terms of recreational use versus the medicinal piece of using cannabis, and that information sharing in terms of health has been a priority that has come from the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis, is getting that information out, and we're very fortunate here to have the First Nations Health Authority in British Columbia to help with that, and they certainly have a webpage dedicated to cannabis. So these are the multifaceted issues that we're dealing with, not only nationally but also regionally. And I thank you all for being here today and partaking in this webinar, and also all thank all the not only the staff from the BCAFN but also the presenters today. It's important information that everybody needs to know, that they're with a lot of things to gain in terms of economic development. There is definitely a lot of risks. So you need to be well informed, and this is what we're trying to do with the toolkit. So with that, I thank you all. Thank you, Michelle Masaicho.
Thanks, Regional Chief. But before we get into any of our big discussions today, I want to let us get to know each other a little bit better through some polling. So a question's going to pop up on your screen. Please select the answer you would like and then click submit. After, we'll be able to see the results together. What region of BC are you calling in from? And then question 2, what is the primary reason that brings you here today? Multiple choice. We'll give you a couple seconds on that. And while we're waiting for you all to submit your responses, I want to acknowledge that we even have some bud tenders. We have economic development people, policy people, economic development, if I hadn't already said that, chiefs and council members. We're so glad you're all joining us today. Instant polling is amazing. Just a few more people to submit their responses. Oh, maybe I'm supposed to even pay. All right. Looks like we have a majority of our people are calling in or presented from the interior, with Vancouver Island a close second, Northern and Fraser and Vancouver Coastal. Small numbers, but my First Nation is interested and involved in cannabis-related economic development with 48%. My First Nation is interested in cannabis regulation and governance, 34%. I'm a business person coming in at 22%, curiosity at 20%, and I want to explore opportunities to collaborate on our approach. So 30%. Thank you all for participating. I will now pass the mic over to Sarah. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Fraze. I'm a policy analyst with the BC Assembly of First Nations, and I work on the cannabis file. I'm just going to take a few moments here to provide a bit of an overview of the cannabis toolkit. We're using the components, the draft components of this kit as a jumping off point for today's discussion. And it's composed of 4 parts. It was shared to all the registrants earlier and is also posted in the chat, and I'll post it again in the chat for anyone who's joined so that you have access to it. Just to provide a high-level overview, first we have a discussion paper on First Nations stories of economic development and cannabis, which explores a number of case studies from First Nations people and First Nations themselves and provides a high-level view of the landscape. And we have each of the people who contributed toward the case studies represented on our panel later on today. Next, we have an in-depth legal memo, which introduces a more nuanced understanding of the legal and economic challenges and opportunities First Nations are faced with. And then finally, we have 2 draft template pieces, which are put forward for discussion and as a potential resource for nations who are exploring how they may wish to regulate, make agreements, or make laws with respect to cannabis in their territories. So today, these are offered up for dialogue and feedback as we work towards the final product. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just asking further clarification on a question that was in the chat. So just for everybody's information, Yvonne's presentation will be circulated following today's webinar. And I now go to the legal and economic landscape, and I invite Yvonne LaRoque for his presentation. I probably butchered your name, sorry.
It's all right. Thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Chief TG, Chief McLeod, and Jamie Sanchez, and a lot of familiar faces today on the call. I'm very happy to be here. I'm calling in from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples in Vancouver. I'll share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared. That is a bit of a resource. I won't go through everything in the presentation. It's based on some presentations I've given in the past for various conferences and things of that nature, and discusses the toolkit. And I'll try to leave a bit of time for either questions or conversation as well, because I think one of the important things to realize is that you know, a lot of the people today on the call are involved in the industry. Have experiences based on real life, let's call it, and what their communities are facing and going through. So I won't purport to be the arbiter of those experiences, and realize that there's a lot of opportunity today to have discussions, share knowledge, and share experiences, and come out with a lot of learning, both for myself and for you. So hopefully I can contribute to that somewhat with my my nerdy legal presentation. So I'm just going to share my screen now. If I can find this. Okay. All right, so hopefully you can all see this. So the legal and economic landscape is what I'm going to discuss today. So the caveat I'll give, because I'm a risk-averse lawyer, is this presentation does not constitute specific legal advice and should not be relied upon without consulting your own legal advisors. It basically presents a high-level overview of the Cannabis Toolkit, which was developed by the BCAFN in consultation with Miller Tilden and Company. So broad topics we'll go over are who we are and who I am, in case you're wondering. An overview of cannabis regulation in Canada. This is for reference only, so I won't go into detail about this because it would take a little bit too long, but I thought I would include in the presentation because I know it's going to be circulated, and it's a bit of a synopsis of information that is provided in the legal memo in relation to the current laws around cannabis regulation in Canada. And then we'll discuss an overview of some current legal issues facing First Nations involved in the cannabis market. And I'm sure many of you will be aware of these and are facing them in your own communities. And then finally, we'll do an overview of the toolkit and some potential uses. So who we are, I'm a lawyer at a firm called Miller Tilden and Company here in Vancouver. We regularly advise Indigenous leadership on various matters related to economic development and otherwise. But we do quite a bit of work in the governance space as well. One of the industries that we've become very familiar with in the last 3 years is the cannabis market, and have advised First Nations in relation to the development of cannabis laws and bylaws, and as well developing businesses and partnerships with industry partners in the cannabis space. I won't go into detail about all the things we do, but there's a list there if you want to take a look. And as well, we sometimes advise non-First Nations entities who want to work with First Nations peoples, provided that they buy into and wish to further true reconciliation. So we're pretty picky about who we work with, and I think we approach things from the First Nations perspective about 95% of the time. But there's also a list of services we provide to those entities in the cannabis industry. So about me, my name is Yvan Guy Larocque. Very hard to pronounce unless French is your first language like mine. I am Indigenous business lawyer at MT & Co, which I mentioned. I'm a member of the Métis Nation and Manitoba Métis Federation from St. Anne, Manitoba. There's a website there if you'd like to check it out, and my email in case you want to get in touch with me. I'm always happy to answer questions or jump on a quick phone call. If there's anything I can help you with, please feel free to reach out. All right, so like I said, the overview of cannabis regulation in Canada is provided for reference. I'm just going to blast through these and get to the next one here. Okay, so overview of current legal issues facing First Nations in the cannabis industry. So here's my brief list of issues facing First Nations in this cannabis industry currently. The first one, Chief TG sort of touched on, is the economics, right? The business case for being involved in cannabis, the cannabis business, or even in regulating the cannabis industry in your territories. Secondly, jurisdiction and legal recognition, licensing and regulation, taxation issues, tax revenue sharing, health and safety, enforcement issues, financing, banking, and insurance. So quite a long list of issues. We'll go through some of the particular details of each. These aren't exhaustive, obviously. There's likely some more issues facing different communities depending on their involvement, whether only in regulating cannabis use and cannabis production or sales in their territories, or if they're involved in the business aspect of things, whether on their own or through partnerships with other parties. So it'll be interesting to hear potentially some of those concerns and those issues facing some of the people attending today. So in terms of economics, obviously one issue is it's expensive and sometimes capital intensive to enter the cannabis industry, especially for cultivation and production. So on the retail side, it's obviously a bit less capital intensive, but for nations wishing to enter the cannabis industry on the production side, it's especially difficult because there are barriers related to startup costs. And this can lead sometimes to partnerships with capital partners or industry partners to try to remedy some of those barriers to entry, which can in turn lead to other potential issues. It's a very competitive market, and there's a current oversupply of products. So as Chief TG mentioned, we've seen a massive boom in the industry, and there's a lot of major players, large production facilities that are struggling right now, and some of them are being diced up, cut and sold, and are facing issues in terms of their evaluations and compensation to executives and a bunch of things that you can see in the news almost on a daily basis. And it's not unlike other booms like the .com bubble, but there is an opportunity, I believe, to differentiate between the large scale manufacturers and cultivators and producers that are, mostly public companies with big massive warehouses trying to grow cannabis, and craft small scale producers and First Nations who are really championing the way in that part of the market. Another issue is, foreign markets are slow to open. This may change in the US. Obviously, the US is a massive market. Although some states have legalized cannabis in the same way that Canada has, it's still a scheduled substance at the federal level. Now, this may change with the new Biden administration in the US, which would be a massive boon to Canada's cannabis market and export market, which is can be quite lucrative for producers. There's high overhead in all the aspects of the market, with key employees being in high demand. So required employees, including master growers, QAP personnel, are and their skills are very much in high demand, and this can lead to very high wages and higher overhead costs. There's obviously other higher overhead costs related to energy consumption and things of that nature. And then finally, the one that I'm sure everyone has experience with is the COVID-19 pandemic, and just increasing costs across the board for labor and other costs, and potentially reducing business generally. Although I think that we've seen in the market, because of COVID-19 restrictions, people staying home a lot more, and actually cannabis sales increasing quite a bit. So the jurisdiction and legal recognition issues are quite important, not only in terms of the cannabis industry, but just generally in First Nations governance across the province and across Canada. Right now, the state of the common law and case law relating to conflicts between First Nation laws and federal provincial laws is really outdated, and it skews towards non-recognition of First Nations laws, which is contrary to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and provincially the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act in British Columbia. And hopefully we're going to see further legislation across Canada, both in separate provinces and at the federal level, to incorporate the UNDRIP into Canadian law, and more recognition of First Nations inherent rights to self-government and jurisdiction over their own affairs and their own lands. So many First Nations are passing bylaws or laws pursuant to the Indian Act or their land code, or pursuant to their rights to self-government, or a combination of these. But there hasn't been any case law or conflicts to be able to settle disputes between various jurisdictional authorities about which laws govern in which scenarios. So that can be a risk and an issue facing many First Nations. So there's can be laws passed by First Nations that don't specifically oust federal provincial laws. So we've seen this quite a bit in our advising. So meaning that potentially producers and dispensaries can be subject to both laws and required to comply with both laws. And so that just ties into the issues again of jurisdiction and recognition. Canada is relying on provinces to enforce cannabis laws to a certain extent. And so the treatment of First Nation laws in different provinces has been inconsistent. So in some provinces, authorities have been working with First Nations and providing a bit more recognition. Others are taking a harder line approach and trying to enforce their laws on reserve or within First Nations territory. So it's a bit of a patchwork of laws and not ideal for certainty for First Nations. So like I mentioned, UNDRIP and DRIPA in BC have yet to lead to recognition of the inherent rights of First Nations to pass laws in relation to cannabis within their territories, and in other industries and other matters concerning First Nations. And so I think this work is just beginning, but it's very murky water. And hopefully, the laws push forward and we see more recognition. Licensing and regulation. Right now, the province and Canada aren't recognizing First Nation laws, licenses, or regulations. for the most part. That ties into the jurisdictional issues, obviously. First Nation governance that are involved in the industry are being treated, on the same level as other industry participants, and not being treated as governments, which is a huge issue. And right now, there's no First Nation-led licensing regime or separate licensing capability on a sort of province-wide or federal level. So First Nations are sort of lumped in essentially with other industry participants. A big one is the competition in British Columbia with the province and the conflicts of interest inherent in the province's regulation of cannabis. So the province is involved in the cannabis business. It owns retail stores and is also the regulator. So there's obviously an inherent conflict there, and the province competing with First Nations and using their power of government to get the upper hand is very concerning. Taxation, right now, there's no recognition of taxation powers in relation to cannabis taxation within First Nation lands, other than the First Nations GST, which is not an ideal solution. There's no separate taxation powers similar to the former First Nation sales tax that could be instituted. Although, as the memorandum will speak to, the First Nations Tax Commission has been working, I think, on some of these matters in their advocacy. I know the Chiefs Council on Cannabis as well, most likely has been working on these issues as well. There's potential tax liabilities for First Nation licensed operators if they aren't paying taxes provincially or federally, including excise taxes. And then, of course, taxation in the form of royalties or community contribution payments, licensing fees, is possible, and what a lot of First Nations have been doing to fill that taxation gap. But they could potentially be challenged by the persons paying those tax-like payments in the event that those persons are not the First Nations themselves engaged in the business. Tax revenue sharing. Revenues generated from the excise tax on cannabis essentially shared between the federal and provincial and territorial governments. So it should be 25-75. So 25% of the excise tax is retained by the federal government, and 75% goes to the provinces. But there's no amounts shared with First Nations or municipalities, which is an issue, notwithstanding the fact that there are First Nations involved in the industry and industry participants on First Nations land who are paying these taxes to the government. And there's no sharing of PST or GST collected on the sale of cannabis, either from First Nations land or otherwise with First Nations. So this is another major issue. Health and safety issues. The current licensing regime doesn't allow easily for testing of cannabis outside of federal licensing regime. So again, this goes to the recognition issue and the jurisdiction issues, but First Nations licensed producers can't easily procure analytical testing. So there's issues around safety and health concerns on that front. And then a lack of resources for First Nations who have their own licensing regime. So there's no coordination or standards other than those provided by Health Canada. And without Health Canada licenses, there's no way to access those health and safety regimes and processes. Enforcement issues. So the first one obviously being enforcement of foreign laws on First Nation lands. So in BC, we have a community safety unit that purports to administer the cannabis laws and regulations and enforcement. Obviously, the RCMP can be involved in certain provinces. And so this enforcement of foreign laws in non-jurisdiction can reduce investment and confidence in the First Nations cannabis industry. Enforcement of First Nation laws by First Nations is difficult without broader coordination and resources. So there's less possibility of even having service agreements with other governments or non-provincially or federally licensed operations to enforce First Nation laws, which adds a lot of burden to First Nations who have their own cannabis regulations and wish to enforce them and provide for safety and health regulations as well. And of course, there's potential liabilities for First Nations who are operating their own cannabis businesses, both in terms of statutory fines and potential civil liability in the event of health and safety issues or bad batches or what have you. So these are all tied in again to the health and safety issues and as well the jurisdictional issues, which I think a lot of the issues stem from the non-recognition of First Nations jurisdiction among, it's not just the cannabis industry, right? Financing issues, the difficulty of financing cannabis businesses generally. So, we talked about the economics. So there's, issues around finding capital to enter the market. It's very saturated. There's a lot of risk, especially difficult for First Nations who are operating on reserve land. There's issues potentially around enforcement of security. And it's just even in the cannabis industry generally, there's issues around enforcement of security, and by security I mean collateral on restricted assets. So you may have a lot of value in cannabis, but it's hard to give that as collateral because the banks don't have licenses to repossess the cannabis, right? So there's issues with that. I mentioned general saturation of the cannabis market and financing sources. And then, that leads to high interest rates and risks associated with private lending and private financing. Banking, I think I saw briefly in the chat, somebody mentioned banking. Banking is a very serious issue and one that comes up quite often. It's difficult to obtain banking services for cannabis businesses generally, whether they're First Nation licensed or provincially licensed or federally licensed. There's a lot still risk-averse banks. Obviously, banks that have international operations are worried about conflicting laws and issues around that for their businesses. It's almost impossible to obtain banking services and POS systems for First Nation licensed cannabis operations. So again, the non-recognition of jurisdiction of First Nations and their legal regimes in relation to cannabis is causing very serious problems for business operations operating under those regimes. So no banking services leads to increased cash risk. So basically operating on a cash basis, and accounting issues. So including anti-money laundering laws and potential liabilities in relation to that. So operating a cash business and not having anywhere to put the money because you can't put in the bank, you can't operate POS systems with credit cards or debit cards. It's a lot of risk to business, and I'm sure many people have some experience with that. Insurance risks. It's difficult to obtain insurance generally for cannabis businesses. The same sort of risk aversion as banks have currently. I think that's changing a bit in the market, but there still are some difficulties paying higher premiums and things like that for what is sort of seen as a riskier business. So commercial liability insurance, product liability, directors and officers insurance becomes more expensive, and then so leads to higher insurance costs. And the one issue that I bring up often is it may be unlikely to collect on claims for non-provincially and federally licensed operations. So again, non-recognition of First Nations jurisdiction and licensing may lead to insurers being happy to take your money and sell you insurance. But as soon as you want to make a claim, they may sort of raise the defense that you're not operating within a legal regime, and that will be most likely, under almost any insurance policy, will be a bar to actually collecting on the claim. So that's a huge risk that I think First Nations involved in this industry have to be aware of. Okay, so I know that was a bit of a whirlwind. There's a lot of issues. There's no easy answers to a lot of those issues, but we can definitely tell that a lot of them revolve around the non-recognition of Indigenous jurisdiction and Indigenous lawmaking powers. So that being said, I'd like to move on to the overview of the toolkit and its uses. So basically, the toolkit, is a set of resources for First Nations wishing to regulate cannabis or enter into the cannabis market. I've listed the ones that we were involved in helping develop on behalf of the BCAFN. So the first is a cannabis policy memo. The second is an annotated First Nation cannabis law template. and the third is an annotated Indigenous Nation Cannabis Jurisdiction and Licensing Agreement, which is sometimes referred to as a Section 119 agreement under the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act. So the Cannabis Policy Memo first is a fairly broad legal memorandum that provides detailed analysis of legal and regulatory issues for BC First Nations in relation to cannabis, as well as a state of current advocacy and certain recommendations. And this is sort of last updated in December 2020. So obviously, things are changing rapidly, and there are changes to the law and changes to advocacy. So it provides a lot of background information and is a good resource, but it shouldn't be necessarily relied on. If you read it in 6 months, there might be some things that have changed, right? So essentially, it can be used as a general resource for First Nation governments, advisors, legal counsel to identify and understand the current state of affairs. It is very long and detailed. It has a lot of references. So, it can be used by your legal counsel to get a handle on the specific legal issues, or for those of you who maybe are having trouble sleeping, you can try reading through that late at night. It might put you to sleep, but it's a good resource, I believe, and there's at least sections in there that'll be applicable and interesting for persons to read. There may be sections that you're not interested in, but take it with a grain of salt, as I mentioned, because the law is changing and the state of affairs is changing pretty quickly. So, but it includes just broadly the following matters. So, background on cannabis legalization, a bit of the history, talks about and details the federal and provincial laws and regulations. Talks about the issues facing First Nations, so the ones that I mentioned above in a bit more detail. Provides for the current status of First Nation jurisdiction and lawmaking authority. So some of the case law and issues around that, which I mentioned, are fairly outdated, and probably I hope that with UNDRIP and DRIPA and similar legislation, we'll see some court cases changing the law for the better in the future. It talks about the background of First Nations advocacy in relation to cannabis, including the AFN's advocacy resolutions that have been passed, and talks about the First Nations Tax Commission's advocacy and various other entities and organizations and things of that nature. And then it also provides some recommendations on asserting jurisdiction and further advocacy. So a bit of a two-pronged approach between lawmaking and asserting jurisdiction and regulating in cannabis, and also advocating for changes to the law and moving the other levels of government forward on a government-to-government basis. The annotated First Nations cannabis law template. So, we've seen over the course of the last 3 years, advising First Nations in relation to regulating cannabis and passing bylaws and laws. We've seen a lot of different forms and a lot of different matters considered, and worked with the BCAFN to build an annotated template. So basically taking what we consider a very good comprehensive template, and then providing notes in it for different choices and matters and recommendations. So again, it can be used as a general resource for First Nation governments, their advisors and legal counsel, and includes the following matters. So annotations, like I mentioned, and these annotations tie into the policy memorandum. So you can find further background on recommendations and choices and the implications of those, tying back to the more in-depth policy memorandum. It includes a checklist, which basically asks questions on various matters and provides corresponding suggested edits to the template. So so nations can consider from the outset what kind of issues they need to deal with and make decisions, and then in turn revise the template to fit their certain circumstances. It provides options for First Nations to pass laws pursuant first to their inherent jurisdiction with reference to Section 35 and the UNDRIP, but also provides some variability for nations that are under land code and wish to use the land code as a basis for their enactment of these laws, or under the Indian Act, or a combination of these. So, different First Nations approach lawmaking from different perspectives, and so it provides some variability there for that. It also provides options for First Nations who wish to exclude foreign legislation, so provincial and federal laws, or as on the other hand, to integrate such laws into licensing and regulation regimes. So some First Nations have taken the approach of excluding other laws, and some have taken the approach of attempting to integrate their laws with provincial and federal laws. So that's a decision on a case-by-case basis. And again, it ties back into the policy memo and the risks it potentially involved in those choices. It provides options for licensing of various different operations, including retail, cultivation, production, and others. So some nations may wish to only regulate certain aspects of the cannabis industry and market on their land. So it provides some variability there, and provide some options for quote unquote taxation. So again, the taxation power issue is still relevant, but it provides some analogous sort of mechanisms to allow nations to collect a form of tax or fees to enable it to have the resources to enforce the laws in various ways. And then also provides for powers to enact regulations and enforcement of these laws. So fairly comprehensive and a lot of variability, but it's a good resource and a good starting place for nations that don't have cannabis laws and wish to pursue cannabis legislation on their territories. And last is the annotated section 119 agreement. So Chief TG mentioned the provincial legislation here, and as well in Ontario, provides for the ability of the province to enter into agreements with Indigenous nations in relation to cannabis. And so there's been two nations in the province so far that have secured such agreements. So the Williams Lake Agreement and Cowichan Tribes Agreement, and we'll hear from Jody Dick, I'm sure, on this when she speaks to that. But essentially, for those nations who wish to pursue a similar agreement with the province, it provides a fairly strong starting point in terms of negotiation and provides different matters. Again, a resource for the government's advisors and legal counsel. So it provides for and it provides annotations similar to the other templates on the matters to be considered, so you can tailor the template. It provides language around recognition of First Nations inherent jurisdiction and First Nation laws in relation to cannabis. Speaks to licensing rights. Provides similar rights and exemptions as the province in relation to provincial cannabis laws. Provides for the collaboration on cannabis production advocacy at the federal level, and also speaks to revenue and tax sharing. Now, the caveat I'll say about this agreement is that this is, the strongest possible agreement that we could draft as a starting point. The province has not accepted an agreement such as this. Hopefully, moving forward by integrating DRIPA and moving the law forward, agreements such as this will be possible on a government-to-government basis. And a lot of good work is happening at a lot of different levels to push the province on these types of agreements. And essentially, I mean, this agreement is under Section 119 of the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, but obviously these sorts of agreements should be on a government-to-government basis and not necessarily between a First Nations government and the provincial bureaucracy. So there's no need necessarily for this to be under Section 119 of the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, but it is a simple mechanism on the province's side to accomplish these goals. So I don't know how I'm doing for time. I hope I didn't take too much time.
You're a little bit over.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I did go through that as fast as I could. So I might cede the question portion, and potentially if there's time later on to ask questions, I can answer questions then if that makes the most sense.
Well, I only have one question from the chat and it came from Jeff, but I'm just going to read it out. Is it faster for medical license versus a regular grow license?
So the licensing process is through Health Canada. There's essentially no huge difference between the medical growing license and the other
Recreational?
type recreational licenses, cultivation, production, and these things. So the regulations, the medical regulations will provide for different matters than the recreational licensing. But in terms of timing, I don't think there's any significant difference in the process. However, it does depend on the volume of applications. The good thing to mention about the federal licensing program is they have the Navigator program, which essentially grandfathers First Nations under the old regime. So previously, you could apply for a license without having an established facility up and running or ready to run. That changed. And so now essentially for non-Indigenous applicants for federal cultivation production licenses, they have to build their facility and have it basically ready to go and pass inspection before they get their license. Whereas First Nations can, and Indigenous nations, I should say, can apply for a license and receive sort of a provisional approval without having to invest the resources into building a production facility. I mean, the difficulty being that if you invest a bunch of money in a production facility and you don't get the license, well, you're going to be out a very capital intensive, amount of resources. So hopefully that answers the question. I can't provide specific timelines because it's a bit of a, most lawyers, their favorite phrase is "it depends." So I'll just
They're
rely on that.
applicant
It depends.
specific.
Correct. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So panelists, get ready. And we're going to have a bit of an energizer right now. So I'd like to invite everyone to respond to a question in one word. When you think about First Nations opportunities and challenges when it comes to cannabis, how do you feel? Type your answer in the chat box or just shout it out and we're going to capture them. So there you go. One word, guys, into the chat. What do you feel about the opportunities or challenges?
Optimistic.
Thanks.
Challenges are capital raises.
Of course you said that, Wes. For me, being a facilitator for over 25 years, I've often facilitated many dialogues. Never have I facilitated one that shows so much optimism as this particular endeavor does. And while we might find it burdensome and overly administrative, I think that the overall response right now that I'm seeing is everyone is excited, hopeful. Finally, it's an opportunity. They're curious and they're optimistic. So I think Sarah, one of the staff are going to put that in a word cloud. Thank you. All right. Okay, let's get started with our panel. Today we have Justin Godfredson, Chief Counselor Ken Watts from Tishat, Wes Sam from Burns Lake. Oh, sorry, Justin, you're from Kamloops. Jody Dick, Cowichan Tribes, and Corey Brewer, Okanagan Indian Band. Welcome and thank you for joining us. So this is how it's going to work. For each round of questions I pose, please raise your hand to indicate you would like to respond to that particular question. I'll go to each person with their hand raised before proceeding to the next question. So, and for the audience, please save your questions to the Q&A, which is just after the break at 3 o'clock. Here we go with the first question. Please provide an introduction, your name, First Nation, role, and how you are involved in cannabis-related governance initiatives and or economic business activities. So I am looking for now, of course, I can't, oh, there we go. Let's go with Corey.
Hi there, everybody. Sorry, just trying to figure this out here. Okay. Name's Corey Brewer from the Okanagan Indian Band, Vernon, BC. My role is developed we own Tamik Wellness, cannabis and health and wellness dispensary. We also own a Tupa's joint that is off reserve. We work with the Okanagan Indian Band and developing our own cannabis law. We're getting quite good traction where we work with other nations across BC as best we can. And yeah, to help any steps that we need to. Yeah, things are going quite well. We look for inclusion in any way possible so that we can continue working towards success. Yeah, and I'm very happy to be here, you guys. Thank you very much. The industry's taken quite the turn for the best for First Nations, I believe. And when we come together and work together, I think we can take this to a whole nother level. This is why I'm here. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Corey. Justin?
White Wyattip, Justin Godfredson and Squex, Tkmipulakin, Tkamloops to Squakmuk. Hello, everybody. My name is Justin Godfredson. I serve on council for the Kamloops Indian Band. I'm joining you all here today from unceded Kamloopsum Uhluch. And my First Nation is simply, to be blunt, has no real dog in the fight, so to speak. We're operating specifically as the governing body, the creation of our law, bylaws, and policies to support band member entrepreneurs that have an interest in pursuing cannabis-related business and trying to provide a structure and a framework for them to do so safely and effectively. And to Kamloops is just our sole purpose is the governing body as of yet. So again, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'll go to Jody.
Thank you very much, Gayla Kisla. My name is Jody Dick. I'm a member of the Canberra River Indian Band, and I'm acting general manager for Cowichan Tribes and their CEO. We've been actively negotiating in cannabis for over the last 2 years. I think here we go. We actually just purchased United Greeneries, which is a production facility that holds 4 licenses: a license to grow, sell, a narcotics license, and a medical license. We're 51% owned, and our partners are here from the Valley. They've been in cannabis for many years. And we've been actively trying to negotiate jurisdiction recognition with the province within our territory on and off reserve. We have 4 retail stores. One is going to be opening in April, our last one in Victoria. And we are working with other First Nations right now to look at flow through products through our production facility. And really trying to focus on the jurisdictional piece with the province. Creating partners right now, we are in discussion with a number of First Nations on retail and our production facility, and really trying to push the envelope with respect to the ability for our products to be produced and sold back into our retail stores and our off-reserve stores. I guess one of the biggest hurdles that we've been finding right now is that we're negotiating with an entity that is governing cannabis, that is got a monopoly on the wholesale market of cannabis, and is our competition. And no matter which way they go with the decisions of Section 119, their business case is going to lose out. So we're quite concerned about that aspect of it. And we believe that where the legislation says the government may, we look at that as being Cowichan may, and we want to replace the government in that legislation within our territory and within the territory of anybody we partner with. So we've got a pretty aggressive agreement in front of them right now where we are looking for taxation, share revenue and taxation, an exemption from excise tax on the to the percentage of what First Nation ownership we have. The biggest hurdle for us is the province is now trying to say, because we're not 100% First Nation, that they would only give us a 1-year agreement. And with the inability for raising capital, we're really fighting that. We have to have an equal playing field. That means we have to be able to get capital invested into our businesses. And the only way to do that is either partnering with other First Nations or having non-Native participation. So I'm really happy to be part of this, really excited to hear from everybody, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Jody. All right, Wes.
Good afternoon. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces here. I'm talking to you from Burns Lake, BC, Burns Lake Band Traditional Territory. Thanks for listening to me every day, everybody. If you don't know, I'm the co-founder and executive chairperson for a company that I've helped found, Nations Cannabis, up here in Burns Lake, BC. It's approximately a 30,000 square foot facility. Our aim is to produce 3,000 kg per year from phase 1. I'm the former band counselor for the chief of Burns Lake Indian Band over an 18-year period, and was municipal counselor for the municipality here. That's just a little bit of the background. Our facility here in Burns Lake, we've been working on approximately 2 years. I also serve as co-chair for the First Nations Leadership Council Working Group on Cannabis. And it's through the working group that we are trying to create new opportunities for all Indigenous entrepreneurs and communities to be a part of the cannabis sector in a meaningful way. I would like to add, I look forward to the day when we can once meet face to face again and sit across the table and chat. I'm still getting used to Zoom and the operations and the ups and downs of it. Anyways, I do look forward to the rest of the questions in the Q&A moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes. Ken?
Tu Uklama Wamish Sishata Hichamamuk Sishata elected chief counselor. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Wamish. My good name is Ken Watt. Elected chief counselor, newly to Sishata First Nation. Former counselor in a previous term, holding the portfolio for economic development and ultimately cannabis in my last term, and now a chief counselor. I'd like to acknowledge Chief McLeod for starting us off in a good way, and Michelle for facilitating and chairing today. Good to see you. It's been a while. And I was joking, thinking to myself, thanks to Regional Chief Terry Gigi for always making me feel like I need to step up my hair game every time I see him. I don't think he ever has a hair out of place when he joins our sessions here. I was asked if he has a makeup artist too or something before he goes, but all kidding aside, thank you to the BCAFN for the toolkit, for the work that they've done, and to the Leadership Council for the working group and what we're trying to do around the jurisdictional side and other work in cannabis. I'm really excited. As Chief Counselor, I'll still be supporting our push for cannabis at all levels on behalf of Sishot, and looking forward to today. So once again, thank you everybody for joining today.
Awesome. Thanks, Ken. All right. Here's to the first real question. How is your nation approaching governance with regard to cannabis? And what role do First Nations laws and government-to-government agreements have in this? And I'm going to go to Jody first.
Okay. It's very important to Cowichan. Our priority has been to, from the start, is to work within their system and create recognition by the province as an equal level of government within our territory. That's the key for us. We feel that without that, we're taking a step back, and we're not being able to properly manage cannabis as we would like to. We did mention that in our discussions with the province, they're very leery about moving forward with these agreements, because they'll have to lose some of their authority and jurisdiction. And I believe that this is our time to really step forward and use the United Nations Declaration legislation and get them to actually initiate these agreements to a meaningful extent. And Cowichan isn't stopping just in cannabis. We'll be working in the gaming side of things as well. So for us right now, that's the ultimate. We need to have some recognition as a government and jurisdiction within our territory. And if we partner with other First Nations, we would expect that our agreement would also be dealt with in that territory as well.
Thanks, Jody. Justin?
Thanks, Jem. Michelle, I think as I alluded in the introduction, to Kamloops is taking more of a sovereign approach, and jurisdiction and title and rights and recognition of that is very important. And I think in Mr. Larocque's presentation, it really illustrated the crux of the issue here. We talk about some economic kickbacks and kind of having a little bit of involvement in that kind of area. It all stems from the recognition of our title and rights, and from a province that's spearheading an initiative on a national level of DRIPA and UNDRIP and the recognition of First Nations. This is a catalyst for change, and this is why I'm so optimistic. This has the opportunity to be that first domino that goes in towards the recognition of our abilities and our rights to self-governance. And I think that's the most important matter. And all of these other things that we're trying to do in conjunction or parallel in this process will naturally fall into place with that recognition of our rights to self-governance, a very basic thing that we're asking here. And from a province that's looking to find a way in the path moving forward on what that looks like, we have a really great opportunity to showcase what that is. And as Jody kind of alluded to as well, not stopping there, this is that first domino, and it goes into maybe fisheries, maybe forestry, maybe mineral rights, and maybe that's where a little bit of the hesitancy comes from a provincial and national scale. And I don't really blame them for being scared, but they opened this door, and we have to do justice by it, and we have to do it right. And it's going to have a very positive change for First Nations, not only on a provincial scale or a local scale or a national scale, but this is the poster child for what it could be like on a world stage. So I'm very, very excited, but I really think that the priority needs to go towards that recognition and to show the province what UNDRIP how it can be implemented and what it looks like for us. And this is an emerging market. We're not talking about 100 years of bureaucracy in the forestry industry where they've got all of these policies that effectively box us out. We have a clean slate and a fresh canvas to paint something that's going to be a real benefit to First Nations the world over.
Thank you, Justin. Wes?
Just unmuting myself. With my company, we've chosen the federal process. Our facility is not located on reserve. It's on 90 acres of land that was initially owned by the 6 First Nations here in Burns Lake. Burns Lake Band has invested, and the local First Nations have invested into this private venture. So we're basically a private company and just utilizing the federal process. And when it comes to provincial, we'll probably utilize the provincial process also. I realize everybody here, it was stated by Miller Titwell earlier, that there's many different routes you can take to getting licensing through Section 119 or the federal process or the provincial process for storefronts. We've chosen this route for investment opportunities, better investment opportunities on fee simple land than it is reserved currently. Thank you.
All right. Corey?
Hey there. Yeah, so we've gone about things really different with working with our chief and council, well, mostly our membership who have stepped into the industry. Most of us are 100% owners of our business. We work with close with our I guess chief and council and the executive director to create our law, our cannabis law, to pretty basically be held to federal or provincial standards, but with our own, working with our nation or our people to kind of dial it in so that we're all on the right page here. And we've been getting a lot of good traction with speaking with, I guess, CSU even. We've taken things another step further by stepping off reserve once UNDRIP has been, once I knew the potential of UNDRIP, we really went through it to understand it and made the connections with, let's say, the city of Vernon and other provincial entities to ensure that we're all on the same page going forward. So we don't agree with the provincial regulations or how they've developed it without us. We've decided to take a stance in the right way by talking with the city, with the local provincial entities to move forward together. So we have been raided twice by the CSU in Vernon because we chose not to get the provincial license. We are looking to work with as many First Nations in BC and Canada, and it's getting a very good traction. We are, yeah, ours is about inclusion, and we want to see this done in the right way. And we don't want to sit here and wait for people to make the decisions for us. We've been there, done that, and now's the time I feel now is the time that we can all move forward in a very united fashion in a billion-dollar industry, because I'm certain that most of our nations are in need of that. So what we're here to do is to take the lead. We're not waiting anymore. We want to work with our nation and territories to see this develop the proper way. And yeah, we'll keep reaching out. And
All right.
I'm very happy again to be here. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. Well, Mish?
Yeah, thank you. So currently Sishot has 100% owned and operated provincially licensed store in our community. And from a governance perspective, our communities wanted us to govern and actually be the owner and operator first, 100% by our nation, and not the majority or minority by somebody else. We will be developing our own laws at some point. We did have a draft law, but I'm actually glad we held off, because I don't know how long the provincially licensed system and process and store will last unless things change. And there's a bunch of factors I'll talk about why later. And our law will reflect our Indigenous laws of Sishot and Richonal's principles, but we'll be exploring a Section 119 agreement once we have made that initiative to go through into cultivation. It's not 100%. I think we're really waiting to see how the industry itself rolls out. I think the province and the federal government have slipped a lot, and I think they've missed the boat on a lot of opportunities compared to states like Colorado and Washington. And you look what they've been able to do, and I think we're miles behind other districts and other states. So that's a bit about, like, from our governance perspective. We are managing, and the community's made a choice that the nation would be the one opening a store. The nation would be the one hopping into cultivation, but really just moving along cautiously, because we're not afraid to assert our rights. We've been doing it for years in fisheries, and if this licensing doesn't work out and things don't change, I'm sure we'll be joining our brothers and sisters that you see on the rest of the call here at some point if things don't change. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Ken. So question number 3, where do you see opportunities for collaboration between First Nations with respect to advancing First Nations rights, title, and interest when it comes to cannabis? And I'm gonna go to Justin.
Thanks, Jen, Michelle. And I think just to be plain here, I think this whole industry in general represents the collaboration and First Nations coming together and sharing ideas, sharing experiences, and advancing in a positive way. I think kind of this webinar that we're in right now is a prime example of that and the strength that comes with it. For those of you that know me, I'm fond of old adages like a bundle of arrows is stronger than a single arrow, or how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And really, this is how we need to tackle these things, and this is what this industry represents. Whether we're talking about a whole province of First Nations with their own complexities and their own images and their own desires and ideals and the direction that they want to go, how do you tackle that? We need to discuss it. We need to look for their feedback, their input. As a counselor, I make decisions for my people, but not without consulting them. So I think this whole thing is a representation of collaboration, and I think it's very, very important. And advancing title and rights is critical. I think this is the main issue and the fulcrum of how we move forward. I'm very, very passionate about the recognition of our title and rights, but we can't do it alone. We need allies. We need allies outside of nations as well. We need the province to understand that we're not looking for the proverbial advantage. We've been held back for 250 years. We're looking for equality, and that's something that we've fought for throughout all of our history. We're not greedy. We just want equal footing, and I think that's a very, very important thing for us to remember. And I'm pretty proud to be a part of this, and again, very optimistic. And I think the whole issue here is the recognition and how do we get reconciliation out of that. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thanks, Justin. Ken?
Yeah, thanks. This is a great question. I actually had a great discussion with Justin about this, and I think nations and those involved in industry all agree that it really lies within the jurisdiction and authority movement, because as I've said, the province and the federal government have slipped up, in my opinion. They've missed the boat on some opportunities in the industry, and I see an opportunity for nations to come together, but we can't do it alone, and it needs to be strategic. We need a really solid provincial strategy on cannabis and how we're going to move forward. What are our top 3 priorities, and how are we going to strategically get there? We've had success on authority for health. We're moving into education. We're going to be pursuing gaming authority. And all these connect, as Justin said, and others have said, Corey, about UNDRIP, about TRIPA, and the different legislation and the pieces that are in front of us. But we need to support one another and actually stand together. And I think our goals are all the same at the end. Some of us might have different theories on how to get there. But if we develop a provincial strategy on how we're going to get there, there's nothing stopping us from, sharing something pretty amazing here in British Columbia for cannabis. And if we do it together, we can make it happen. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Corey?
Hi there. Yeah. So there's so many opportunities that I can't even count them on both hands when it comes to working together, nation to nation to nation to nation. They can start right from seed to right to sale. Not to mention the health and wellness impact that comes with it. Even in the mental health, and from physical to mental health and wellness, we have the ability to basically take the lead with the right individuals by our side. So to me, it seems that the documents are more of a tool to help us to get to where we need to be through collaboration. And like we all know, it's a $1 billion industry, and this can really lead us into the right light. And I would be more than happy to see us all a success. This is a success story, my friends. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Wes?
With a question like this, I'd like to focus on collaboration and what we can do together in the industry as First Nations entrepreneurs or First Nations nations, however you are going into the market, whether it is through Health Canada or the province, or through your nation, or through yourselves as an entrepreneur. I'd like to see, and I've discussed this with some First Nations leaders here and there, but haven't had the time as of yet, but I will shortly. We're almost completed our capital raise for finishing our facility. I'd like to work with like-minded people to start a First Nations group that, a business association, people that are involved in the industry, so we could start right now. What do we need as a business? What do we need as an association? What do we need as a nation? How can we co-brand our products? How can we get our products on the international market, whether it be recreational or medical or topical, or however you want to enter the market? There's so many different licenses you can acquire. I think an association, First Nation association, would be powerful, and I'd like to throw that out there to the leaders and entrepreneurs for thoughts coming up in the next few months. That would be direct action for me as a business person right now. Thank you.
Thanks, Wes. Jody?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had quite a few discussions. We've been in discussions with Ken's group and a number of other groups in the interior about collaborating and how we can work together. And I think the key here is keeping the government centered with what needs to happen, is that recognition, legislative recognition. And they have the ability to do that. They have the ability to secure that under Section 119. And I believe that we need to push the government for open transparency. I don't know about any of you guys, but in the 2 years we've been working with the province, they keep telling us it's going through the system. When we got our Section 119 agreement, we kept asking, well, what is the process? Who sees what, and how do they approve that? What are the factors for approval? Because I feel like we need to shine a light on that process. Again, reaffirming that there are competition and they're the regulators. So open that process up to all of us so that we can share in collaboration on how we see us moving forward, and actually showing the benefits of recognizing our jurisdiction as well. So we're open to having these discussions, working with our other First Nation neighbors. We're in discussions on production side of that about where the federal government needs to look at a different process that's strictly related to First Nations and licensing. So it's definitely something we're interested in, and we're open to discussion and absolutely open to working collaboratively and together to really push this envelope and really get to see if they really are interested in initiating these government-to-government agreements.
Thank you so much. So question 4, and I'm going to go to Wes first because I know he knows the answer to this one. What are some of the key barriers First Nations looking to enter the cannabis market face? How did you navigate these challenges, and what would you like to see change?
Well, that one has been with me since day one. I've been involved in this industry, trying to basically break into it for approximately 8 years. When it was first a medical license, trying to obtain from there. It's only been in the past couple of years that we've made the decision to go at it ourselves rather than partner with companies that have a license. We believe there's a tremendous opportunities for Indigenous participation, but they aren't being realized because of a number of challenges. The federal licensing process requires a great deal of upfront capital, number one. And banks, it's hard to get anything out of the bank in this industry, as anybody knows, including the bank account itself is difficult. In the beginning, governments were slow to respond or collaborate with Indigenous people across the country in advance of legislation to encourage active participation of Indigenous communities in the regulated industry. From a federal perspective, the establishment of the Navigator program has been appreciated. But aside from that, there's been nothing of substance implemented or announced that would positively affect Indigenous participation at this time, straight across, for federal licensing. That's where our company is at. However, from a provincial perspective, initiatives such as the BC Cannabis Working Group have given a voice to Indigenous peoples. The announcement by the BC government to launch an Indigenous shelf space program is a positive step. It's a start. There was a number of other announcements with that, direct delivery, shelf space, farm to gate may help this industry quite a bit. We hope to get a signal from government that understands the important role it can play in supporting the development of the industry, in which First Nations can play a huge part. Initiatives of this kind would help encourage First Nations entrepreneurs to step into this space, but also have the benefit of encouraging investment into companies such as ours. As the province moves into a period of economic recovery from COVID, we believe that emerging industry can play a huge role in rekindling our economy, as everybody else here at the table sees the same. In spite of the low introduction of regulations and opportunities to encourage and support our participation, we are hopeful things will change. With groups such as the Cannabis Working Group, and hopefully, Chief Harvey's working on the federal level, some changes there. It's important to add, our vision as nations, and the development has occurred through our lens, an Indigenous lens. I've seen firsthand, a lot of the generational issues my community faces, and I believe, what we're doing can help change the impact of that through investment, jobs, and what have you. We believe that nations, the cannabis, when it came out, we all knew, well, there's something we could do. We don't have other resources like, our forestry, fisheries, mining, that's all taken up or disappearing. This is one industry we can take and move with. But there's a lot of barriers from, day one. A lot of it's capital intensive. For production, you're looking at anywhere 3 to 5 million for micro production. And for LP, such as the one we're doing, it's up to, 15 to 25 million, depending on the size. A lot of hurdles and challenges. Optimistic, you have to be absolutely optimistic in this game. We're talking some big numbers and some huge returns, hence the optimism. But hopefully I answered that. I think that's it on that one.
Thanks, Wes. Corey?
Oops.
Yeah, so we're on question 4, correct?
Yep.
So barriers, banking obviously being one of them with the way we're going forward, and I don't know if I'm thinking most people have that problem as well. But another one I think that would be something to talk about is I don't really think they're much of barriers. What we're coming up against here is a little more of a holdback than a barrier. We've been breaking through barriers since we got started in this industry, and banking is going to be one of them as well. With the way the world is currently moving through cryptocurrency, we are keeping on top of that. So the thing that we would like to see is maybe having more support from leadership in each aspect of the industry. Right now, we are very hands-on with trying to develop our law to the proper level where we can get adequate banking services, so we can run a proper business. It's really one of our toughest challenges right now. And the market is, the way cryptocurrency is working is kind of where we're kind of looking for the remedy for that at this time because of how banking is. Let's see, I guess product wise, we deal with the best product testing and everything. We like to keep it safe for our customers and consumers. I don't see very many First Nations testing facilities. We had to take it upon ourselves to purchase testing equipment to be able to test our own products. So yeah, that was the way we overcome that challenge. But basically our main challenge is going to be banking for the time being, and we really need the support of leadership to help us push this through. It kind of been like I said, it's not a barrier, it's more of a holdback, but pretty optimistic that we can work this out together. And this is another thing with this team. I think this table, I think once people hear and see how we are going forward, we're just going to get bigger and better. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Corey. Ken?
Yeah, thanks. This is a great question, given the situation our nation went through and how we entered the industry. Is one of our first barriers was, is there a community will even to be entering this industry as a nation? And ultimately it was actually surprisingly a huge percent of our membership were totally supportive of us entering the industry. But as we looked at our potential options, as many have said, the banking and the financing became, on the retail side, became a bit of an issue, and ultimately we decided to go the provincially licensed route. But one thing, some other barriers I recognized is some of the partners and potential consultants and others that knocked on our door, and I'm sure like many of the nations here, you had people the day it was legalized, you had 20 or 30 different people saying, they can support you and make it all happen for you. And really just filtering out those, that alone took some time for our nation in deciding which route we were going to go. But I think the other one is obviously access to capital and financing, as I've said. But one barrier that we, here in our community of Port Alberni, a small community, less than 20,000 people, the black and gray market is huge here in our territory. And it's, I spoke with Justin about it, that maybe we'll actually have a red market someday. And it's actually our own jurisdiction and our own authority, and stores that we certify. And, but again, from my perspective, there were definitely some barriers. I think time was another. If you go the provincially licensed route, it could take you a lot of time. For some of the people that are applying, probably even now, and getting your actual staff certified as well through the provincial route takes a lot of time. It's not cheap, but we managed to do it. And what I think I'd like to see change was the end of the question there is really, like I said, strategically, all of us coming together and really hammering out a plan of how we're going to move forward together as nations. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Jody?
Thank you. Barriers. I guess the key barriers that retail especially is finding is competition, right? And I think that I heard in the earlier comments about the saturation of the market. The province has set us up so there's no way to differentiate between each other. Everybody has to do the same thing. And I think that's where one of the biggest challenges are, and forms our biggest push within our 119 agreement, is the ability to be able to sell our own products, to be able to sell other First Nation products, to be able to advertise and have e-commerce. Those are all aspects that are open to the government, but not open to us. And I feel like the access to capital, that becomes a question where the province wants to be involved and dictate who is going to be involved in your business side of things. And I think the key here, what we got to remember is there's a governance component where we are negotiating the government to government agreements, which is that governance side of things in that jurisdiction. The province should have no say in how we do the business side of things. Whether we bring in partners or investors should be our own business once we get our jurisdiction. And what they're saying to us now is jurisdiction and business, we'll talk about both of them. And I think that we need to take that off the table. I think First Nations need to say, here's the governance component, and we're going to assume jurisdiction. We're going to get a Section 119 agreement. And then how I do my business is my business. If I need to bring an investor in so I can build capital to build my businesses, that's an economic business side of things. And we're allowing them to intertwine both of them in our government agreements. We're fighting over the fact of what is that business going to look like? You can't have anybody a part of your business. You can't have anybody invest in your business. Right there, they shouldn't be in that lane. They need to stay in the lane that they're in, and that lane is governance. So get our agreements in place, and then allow us to do business, because that's how they're holding us back. The ability to not be able to raise capital and not run our businesses like businesses because they have to form part of that agreement. No, like they shouldn't have to form part of the agreement. You know what I mean? So that's our position. Here's our agreement that gives us our jurisdiction to roll, and then how we roll then is up to us. And I think that that's one of the biggest factors, and that's where we all have to pull together and say, no way, you guys, this is our agreement, and our business side is our business side, and how we move that forward should be up to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Justin?
Thank you, Michelle. And I think kind of you guys are asking for my perspective on this, and please forgive me, I'm going to be a little bit blunt here. I think one of the biggest barriers is the province and the federal government. We're going into 4 years of legalization, and that consultation is an ongoing process. The planning that goes into legalization had to have taken years. First Nations weren't considered and all of that, but the better part of a decade. It's unacceptable, and it's no longer an excuse worth hiding behind. I think it's grown thin and it's old. That's one of the more frustrating components of this. And you take a look at, it was mentioned, the CSU kind of perspective of things, where CSU is coming in to do investigations and confiscations and fines. They're a complaint-driven process, and where are those complaints coming from? The white market. The other issue is the black market. And Ken, I completely agree. It's referenced as the gray market. It certainly should be rephrased as the red market, because this is exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's a drop in a bucket compared to what the provincial and federal governments kind of realize through this process. And what does it cost them? A little bit of independence and self-reliance for a First Nation, where we strive for a world where handouts and funding should be nice to have. It's not something that we live and die by. And this is what we're fighting for here. It's more than just the cannabis industry. It's about a change of our worldviews and our recognition and our rights. So I think the federal government and the provincial government are our biggest obstacle here, and they're the biggest ones in a conflict of interest. But what do? We have to go through this path, and we have to do it right. And I think that we can. We need to get an epiphany to kind of happen on a provincial and national scale, that people start to realize this, and we come together and we fight for this. All of these other things that we talk about and we're looking and that are operating in parallel with what we're trying to do will fall into place. And what would I like to see change? Recognition. That's key. That's the foundation that we build off of, and what our future looks like from that. So I'll leave it at that. Very blunt, very plain, and that's my worldview on this.
Excellent, and thank you all for that, for being so candid on those responses to that question. This is the last question we have before our break, so I'm going to go first to Corey. What is the first step you recommend communities or business people take if they are interested in cannabis governance, economic development, or business?
I'd recommend working together as a whole. We've been attempting that, to work together as a whole and reaching out to as many nations as possible. We've connected with multiple different nations throughout BC and across Canada. I think that the cannabis industry, we're just getting started. There's much more room for growth and improvement through physical and mental health and wellness. I think that right now we need to go for it. You know, there's too many people kind of waiting for certain decisions to be made by those that have no business making decisions for us in this industry. I consider what we're doing and how we've gone about it to be the best within the industry because of the individuals that we're working with. So teamwork makes the dream work. We keep working this together, and and instead of agreeing to agree, or I say gray or black market, maybe we can start calling it something like a legacy market for Indigenous people, because this is something that we're creating, and along the way, more and more will be joining us. So I think we stand strong and kind of hold fast and push through this the right way, and that's through inclusion and education. Thank you.
Thanks, Corey. Justin?
Thank you, Michelle. And I think this is a very important question. And for me, it starts by remembering who you are. First Nations people are resilient and adaptable. And that's going to be a key mentality on how we move forward. The development of our law, our bylaws, our policies that go hand in hand with provincial and federal laws or are better, and they suit our needs. And who knows our needs better than ourselves? So whether you go a provincial or a red market or a hybrid of the two or whatever, I think the possibilities are there. But having these kind of foundational pieces, these structures put in place, a plan moving forward on how you collaborate with your neighbors as well, reaching out to other nations that surround you or other nations throughout the province or Canada for that matter, and looking to learn from what they've done and some of the mistakes they've made or some of the successes that they've had. I think First Nations, looking to support other First Nations is one of our biggest strengths, and it's a part of who we are. We're in this together, whether we like it or not, whatever our perspective is. I think when it comes to recognition of our rights to self-governance, maybe some nations don't want to have anything to do with this, and that's their prerogative, but that's their right when their recognition for their rights to self-governance is accepted and it becomes the mainstream norm. So I think we have the ability to navigate our own future as we see fit, and we know it best. So I think some foundational structure and some collaboration with your neighbors and those you know and reach out to and learn from. Cookstown.
Thanks, Justin. Ken?
Awesome, thank you. So this one's actually one of my favorite questions, because I talked a bit about mandate earlier, and going through your community planning process, whether it's your CCP or your land use plan, I'm sure your members have identified cannabis at some point. And ultimately that's what started it for Sishad. And we had a community engagement, we let them become informed. And so when I think about other nations, I think that's a great step, is really involving your community from the very beginning. We had the engagement with both federal and provincial government coming to visit our community and just talk about the industry. We had local government share their thoughts on bylaws and things they were going to be doing. And we ultimately brought our people along, and then we brought potential partners for them to hear from and what route they'd like to go. And so they heard from potential partners, and ultimately they directed us just to enter the industry. And so again, I think from my perspective, from a nation, if anybody's interested in entering the industry, whether it's in cultivation or not, I really encourage you to engage our people, because once you have that mandate and that strong support from your people, it makes it a lot easier. And I will say, again, my initial thoughts is like, geez, are we going to get any support to do this in our community? And now what I'll say is some of our highest customers in our store are actually some of our elders in our communities, not just my own community, but outside communities. Really great to hear. And they say how, respectful our staff are, and our staff appreciate them. For some of them that never utilized, the industry or cannabis are now using for many purposes, and arthritis and other matters from a medical perspective. But again, if you encourage and you work with your community, I think you get that mandate, but you also get that sense of ownership. Like, okay, we need to make this work, and if it's not working, how can we all get behind asserting our rights or going whatever the route you choose? Your community's got to get behind you, and again, it's nice to see that even our elders are supportive of this industry now in our community. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Wes, did I go to you?
No, no, good question for sure. So as a private company, what we've done and some advice I could give, for startups or other companies, it was important for us to surround yourself with a professional team or organization. It's a huge team effort, and I'm speaking towards getting production licenses. There's a lot of people you need and advice that you need. One big one is quality assurance that could expertly guide you through the approval process. Somebody who could answer all the technical elements that are required. One big thing, a lot of startup companies are just thinking about the money and how much they can make. They forget a lot of the main things, especially of your master grower, and in the investment you have to have him as a part of your company. Through your master grower, that's the money maker of the company going forward. After all is done, throughout the whole process, you have to have a variety of products and the imagination of the master grower. Unlike a restaurant where you go there because they have a great head chef and you'll always go there, it's the same thing as a master grower. So for us, we have 1, 2, 3 that are have been working with us for a number of years. We have a great production line coming up into the near future. But those are very important. And at community level, if you're thinking of production, you have to take inventory of do you have the water supply, access to power, the workforce, staffing for your business. There's a lot of things to consider, and also patience is needed if you're working through the federal or provincial process. We're on year two here. Capital intensive. We're 10 million in right now. We're raising the final 17. But end of the day, you have to build your building and then they'll approve it. So it's a huge capital upfront cost. And there's not too many people that will actually invest into that. It's very specific. We've traveled across the country and been on 50,000 Zoom calls, but we're narrowing that down, and hopefully we're in production within 8 months here. We've got about 5.5 months left of construction, 65% complete. COVID didn't help at all, of course. Everything shut down then, but I'm always open for any questions or advice going through the federal, provincial systems. But it's a great deal of patience, getting to where we're at. Thank you.
All right. For final comments, and this last question, what is the first step you recommend to communities, business people? Jody.
Sorry, what was the question?
The question is, what is the first step you recommend communities or business people take if they're interested in cannabis, governance, economic development, or business?
I agree that like for us, our first step was going to community and getting community participation and getting an idea of where the community saw us going with respect to cannabis. In Cowichan, we adopted a health and wellness model, one of education, which is what guides us through our decisions and how we do business. We have a great partnership with UBC on different strains of cannabis, and we're building a curriculum right now for cannabis growers, master growers, and bud tenders. So we really went to the community. We checked back with the community to make sure we're on track, and I think that's huge with respect to getting that buy-in and support of your community. I agree. If you're going to get into the production side of things, it's a huge capital investment. The way the system is set up right now, it gives so much insecurity right off the get-go. We were lucky that Harvest One needed to sell some of their assets, and one of their assets happened to be the production facility here in Duncan, and that was. We had already started to clear and get ready to build our production facility. So we pivoted at that point. I think the other key thing is for those First Nations that are looking to get into micro cultivation is keeping in mind that micro cultivation is smaller and less capital intensive, but you need to have that production, that LP, to be able to purchase your products, and you have to have a secured agreement in place. I welcome any First Nation that's looking to get into either retail or cannabis to reach out to any of us or any other First Nation that's been in it already, just to help you avoid some of the pitfalls that we fell into, and just really just sharing information. I think that's the key thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Jody, and thank all of you panelists for sharing your insight today. So with that, I think I will go to Chief Harvey McLeod for final comments, and then to Regional Chief for the closing.
We've had some really good discussion here this afternoon, and we just applaud all of the work that you're doing in your communities to introduce a new opportunity that's safe for everyone, that has all of the interests of our citizens in the development plans that you are engaging. One of the issues that I face, and I know that we all face, is that when it comes to relationships with the provincial and federal governments, there has to be a clear understanding about jurisdiction. I know that from day one that I was introduced to the opportunity, jurisdiction was top priority. Let's have talk about that. Your jurisdiction, where did you get it? And where is there jurisdictions for First Nations communities in this province and across Canada? And of course, it goes back to our inherent right. Because we're looking at jurisdiction, we're also looking at developing the laws that surround that opportunity. How do we make it safe? How are we inclusive? How do we ensure that we have space, that we have a place in this opportunity? And of course, it's always, it's not easy to have a look and change legislation. Federally, you know, one of the early interventions, early obstacles we've seen was changing federal legislation. And at the time, we were fortunate enough to have an individual as a minister that had a willing ear. But she has since left the governing party of the country. But it did open the eyes, and we were able to have a little bit of influence in saying, this is a section in the federal legislation that we need to have a look at. We need to have a way that we can open that door to change the wording, change the intent, so that we have a space, so that we have opportunity. And of course, that led right down to the discussions that we had with and are having with the province. Mind you, it's territorial, and it's an opportunity. And I found that working with you, hearing your challenges that you're facing to get involved or to have your issues resolved or understood, the only way we're going to do that is continue working and talking with one another. Because I certainly don't have answers for how we're going to approach it from Upper Nicola. But I know that if I work with you, with your experience and your understanding, we're going to find a way on how we can do this together. And I really thank you for participating, and I'm looking forward to continuing to develop a solid working relationship with you. We got some champions that I leaned on going through this process, Chief Chip Seymour over at Cowichan. We've developed a really good, solid working relationship and understanding of what he was being challenged with, and supported him and gave him an opportunity to offload some of the challenges that he was going through. So we shared that. And I see us doing this same thing with all of the leadership in this province to assist one another to really uplift and enforce and give feet and meat to the United Nations Declaration of the DRIPA Act here in BC, and the United Nations Declaration thing that's moving through Parliament right now, through the federal Parliament. We have a lot of opportunity, and I'm just looking forward to the discussions. So with that, White Limlet, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Regional Chief? While we wait for the regional chief, I can call the last door prize winner, and the door prize winner is winning CBD products from Vital for Health, and that's Penny Carrington. All of these gifts will be mailed to you for the winners. So I believe Sarah probably will need your full mailing addresses so we can get those to you. And the hotel gift was from the Sandman. And maybe while we're waiting for the regional chief, we can see the word cloud that was created. Oh, there he is.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm driving right now, but I just pulled off the side of the road here.
Okay.
At any rate, just want to thank all the presenters. Very insightful and very important information from all the presenters, Wes, Jody, Ken, Corey. I mean, really, it's important information that our Indigenous people need to know, you know, especially in this time of change and flux. When this began, the legalization of cannabis back in 2017, there was, you know, this Chiefs Committee was developed back in 2016. But, you know, we've definitely seen the political change in terms of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People being passed here back in British Columbia in 2019, and now we have C-15. I think it's really important to understand that all the jurisdiction issues, the governance issues are being dealt with in different ways, and people need to know what is at, I suppose, in the toolbox to allow them to take over jurisdiction. The point being is that with jurisdiction and governance, is that these two levels of government, or any government, isn't going to be willing to give it to us. We have to take it. And that's really important for your communities to take your rightful place as you know, rightful holders of your own governance. Further to that, even if we did have an equal share and created that, you know, justice, there is the market realities. And that's not, you know, something that's out of our control. But yet there too, we have to fight for our market share, our marketplace, and really elbow our way in there and create that space that we need so we are successful as Indigenous peoples in taking our rightful place in the economy. So nothing's going to be given to us. Once again, we're going to have to fight for these things, and I'm willing to do it as well as you are. And you know, in the comments at the start of this webinar was very optimistic, and that's really good to see. So going forward, I really believe there needs to be more of these types of webinars, more of these types of discussions. What I'd like to see is, what do BC First Nations want to see in amendments to the Cannabis Act federally? I think regionally, we need to ask that question of ourselves before October, before these amendments are made, so we get in a position here in British Columbia, and perhaps as the chair for the Chiefs, co-chair of the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis, we could bring that up to a federal level, and perhaps there's like minds in different regions, so we can create that space that we need. You know, we can create some semblance of equality and justice that we're all seeking. so we're successful in whether it's cannabis or any other economic development initiative that is out there. So with that, I certainly hope this has been great, Michelle. Thank you for chairing this, and once again to all the presenters that were here today, Justin, Wes, Corey, and the rest of you. It was really enlightening, and it was good to hear all of your experiences. More First Nations need to know this. It's just your story needs to be told, because there's what I'd hate to also see is that a First Nation dump a whole bunch of money in this and come out on the wrong end. We've all seen it. We've all seen the fly-by-night companies, the snake oil people out there will do it for you. And really, in many respects, we've experienced it before in different industries. So I hate to see ourselves get taken advantage of. So I think the more information we can compile together and share, the better it is for all of us. So thank you, and I look forward to perhaps in the very near future another one of these that is putting forward a sure foot from BC and what we want to see in legislation, and perhaps make Section 119 agreements better. So thank you, Michelle, and thank you all the staff for attending today. Masaicho.
Claco Regional Chief. And I think Sarah has the word cloud ready for us. And before we go, I want to just say that the two things that we have not discussed in any great detail today are hemp and its relationship to the cannabis industry, and the healthy products and the healthy use of cannabis, or even having healthy boundaries within communities to stores and stuff. So those are three areas that we did not cover. And I just want you to know that Sarah and the team at BCAFN has captured all of these things, and we'll probably be creating another webinar. But here's your word cloud. Thank you again, everyone. Enjoy yourselves today. Get out and stretch. There's sunshine on Vancouver Island, so I hope you have sunshine and enjoy your day.